Alright, this is another video of completely unsubstantiated claims. Absolutely no proof to back any of this up. This is how we roll. We're going to go over the healers after having analyzed them, objectively, impartially, looking at all the data and how they were performing. And then we're going to discard all of this and we're going just with our feelings. There is something wrong about this spec. Something's not quite right here. I don't trust this spec. That's what we're gonna do now. Wild calls about healers. Let's go. So the first gutsy call, the first Feelycrafting we will do about healers is the one I had for a while now. At the back of my head, this feeling, which has been substantiated more and more by other players, particularly healers that are better than me and have more knowledge about this, which is that it felt like the damage profiles of Castellnatria were going to be different than the previous expansions. At least the last couple of tiers on BFA for sure. And this meant that the previously thought of conceptions about which healers are strong were going to shift. When we go and look at the previous, perception that players had about healers in Mythic Plus and Raids from BFA throughout most of the beta, in Mythic Plus, Resto Druid was still king, followed by Holy Paladin and then Discipline Priest because of the damage they can bring. Then you had Mistweaver and Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman having more problems dealing with heavy single target hits to heal immediately, and Mistweaver the same but for AoE, as well as both of them lacking damage. And then at the bottom, whatever that is. And then for raids, you had the very clear divide of specs that have flat damage reduction or effective health pool increases, and then specs that do not. You have Spirit Link Totem, you have Devotion Aura, and you have Barrier, and even Rapture. And that was what made those specs extremely powerful in raids, and it has been so for like a couple of expansions by now. So the real shift is about the damage profile. The real call here, the real gutsy call, is raid related for this. The fact that damage seems to be more focused in Castellnatria about single target and cleave healing. Cleave healing meaning 2 to 3 to 4 targets taking heavier damage, as opposed to 15 of them, requiring widespread massive AoE, right? So the previously thought specs that had lower throughput, lower effectiveness in HPS, but much stronger external cooldowns were losing value, and specs that had shitty externals, like Revival, were gaining much more value. So the Feelycrafty call is this. I think Holy Paladin will lose more value than it looks like. It has been for a long time member of the three sisters, the three brothers at the top, because of Devotion Aura, and for a long time in BFA after the scaling of Glimmer of Light, also because of the massive throughput, the massive HPS. Unlike Discipline Priest that didn't really have extremely powerful throughput, they just had massive damage reduction capabilities, Holy Paladin was also dishing out insane HPS. In Shadowlands they have lost this, Glimmer has become a talent and they have lost a lot of the borrowed powers, the haste and the cooldown reduction scaling that made it very powerful, as well as the problem of all of these very good scaling specs have at the start of a new expansion, which is terrible stats. So now they would still be S tier if we were looking at BFA and simply considering them as being the spec with Devotion Aura, right? The spec with the damage reduction raid cooldown. But in Castellnatria, when we consider the shift in damage profiles needed to be healed, I think they will lose in value because of their throughput being significantly lower than BFA, at the very least for the first part of the expansion. Although, when it comes to Mythic Plus, the Crusader's Might Holy Shock centric build is still alive and well. You have lost a lot of your borrowed powers as Holy Paladin, but you have Divine Toll. Divine Toll for Kyrian pretty much makes up for a lot of the missing borrowed powers you had, at least when it comes to keeping up Glimmer of Light on all your party in Mythic Plus. It's gonna hit all of your party and give you 30 seconds of Glimmer on a 1 minute cooldown. So literally 50% of the time you can have Glimmer up on the entire party. Not to mention it can still be used offensively, which is also very powerful in Mythic Plus for a healer. The problem with this is that once you have Glimmer active on all your party, you won't have the haste and you won't have the cooldown reduction to keep up your Holy Shock spam. You don't have really any legendaries and conduits that synergize with your Holy Shock cooldown reduction or your Avenging Wrath uptime, which makes the build weaker. it makes the throughput weaker. The legendary Shock Barrier, the one that synergizes with Holy Shock, is purely defensive, but at least it just got buffed to be capped from 3 to 5 targets, so now at least it can work properly in a Mythic Plus group, for example, which is why Holy Paladin will drift more towards a different build that Blizzard has tried to put into the beta months ago, and it was never considered until a series of buffs and additions made it now the to-go way to raid with, which is the Holy Light centric build. Playing with the Inflorescence of the Sunwell legendary, buffing your Infusion of Light, as well as the Conduit Resplendent Light, further buffing Holy Light, now makes your hard-casted style much better. When I made my original video about healers, I said, you have two styles as Holy Paladin, the melee DPS healer and the hard-casted healer, and right now the hard-casted healer is much worse. Now it has been improved, definitely, and it is also the standard way to raid with. But my gut feeling is still the same. I still think they have lost too much from BFA, and at the start of the expansion they will be too weak. Even with a different hard cast centric build, I think they will lose some value compared to other more stable throughput healers like Mistweaver and Resto Druid. So there was a lot of doom and gloom regarding Mistweaver for a lot of BFA, and a lot of the beta, right? Hands on our heads, abandon ship, the sky is falling, all is lost. Right? As well as being accompanied by the usual share of bugs that monks are plagued with. But as we went through the beta, they have gotten more and more buffs, and they have gotten stronger and stronger. And obviously they have gotten passively stronger by the fact that the damage profile of Castelnatria could be shifting to favor them more compared to before. Number one, we mentioned this first because it's the one that's more prone to being nerfed, to being changed. It's Yulon's Whisper. Mistweaver basically right now has the strongest legendary of all the healers. Or wait, they had, because it just got nerfed. But before it was completely broken, now it is still exactly what you need in this type of damage profile. This cleave healing, 6 targets being hit. Not 15, not 20, it's not damage reduction, it's just massive healing on a smaller amount of targets, which is very powerful. Then, they still have very good single target healing. Mistweaver Monk has always been a very powerful single target healer. With their, pred cleave healing they can do by tagging multiple targets with Renewing Mists and then heal them up with Vivify is what makes them super powerful, possibly. All these situations where you won't have to heal 15 or 20 targets, but you will have to heal 4 targets with a heavy hitting debuff. The Monk will be able to do a very good job at that. Mistweaver Monk's plus is also the fact that they don't really lose much from spread healing. They can heal a group of targets that is stacked just fine. They can also talent into Refreshing Jadewind to make it even stronger, or they can simply heal them while spread. It's not that big of a problem for them, as opposed to, say, Holy Paladin. Their Covenant, Bone Dust Brew, also works pretty well in this style of healing, coupled with the Necrol Conduit Lead by Example to give them stat boosts whenever they use their Covenant active, which is very powerful because it's only on a 1-minute cooldown. They can have some pretty nice burst windows of healing. So I do think Mistweaver is going to look better than it has been for quite a while now. Discarded for too long because Revival is garbage and they lack a powerful external. Now, with more importance on single target and 2 to 3 to 4 target healing, I think they will be way more powerful. Now, the other spec is Resto Druid. And Resto Druid is basically here for the same reason. Resto Druid has had very good and powerful sustained HPS, sustained throughput, because of their HOT based system. Their heal is already there when the target is taking damage, so it works very well for HPS. Their healing cooldowns have basically been based on just doing healing, not preventing damage taken, tranquility, and if they want to flourish. Previously, this wasn't as powerful. That's why Resto Druid wasn't as powerful, because what you cared about before was reducing the damage you would take in the first place, and then you would use Tranquility to heal it back up. You can't use Tranquility to heal someone back up if he fucking dies from the damage, which is why you needed damage reduction like Devotion Aura, like Barrier, and like Spirit Link Totem. But if this damage profile for healers changes in Castelnatria, and you get more importance on continued healing, as well as 2 to 3 to 4 targets, cleave healing, spread cleave healing, whatever you want to call it, then Resto Druid is going to gain much more value than they have up until now and for a while, ever since the importance on damage reduction raid cooldowns became paramount for raiding. Their, star covenant is Convoke the Spirits, which is very powerful, of a cooldown for our healer, especially when it doesn't even cost mana for you and you synergize it with some of your other talents, proccing off of this Covenant ability. But then other things like your legendary. When you play with Memory of the Mother 3, you have exactly what you want. Wild Growth, giving you a chance to hit 4 targets with just a single regrowth or a single rejuvenation, which is very powerful, particularly for spot healing when you're playing with things like Abundance, when you're playing with a conduit like Flash of Clarity, saving up your clear casting for when you proc this legendary. The amount of burst healing on 4 different targets with regrowth, very likely to be a crit, with healing increase from Flash of Clarity is massive and very good for what you want for the damage profile of Castle Natria. So this is my first feeling when it comes to healers. These two type of healers, Mistweaver and Resto Druid, will be stronger, and Holy Paladin will be weaker. Now, on to the second and last of my Feelycrafting calls about healers with the most Feelycrafty of them all, the most biased one, Restoration Shaman. Since it's part of my class, my main spec, Elemental, being Shaman, I am as biased as it gets for this call. Completely unfounded and unsubstantiated by facts and logic, I'm calling Restoration Shaman to be much better in Mythic Plus than it previously was thought of. For raid encounters, the perception of Shaman was already high, and even when we take into account the possible shift in types of damage that is going to happen in Castle Natria, Restoration Shaman will still be powerful for that. With their Riptide, the newly reworked, super high front-loaded Riptide, plus their Chain Heal, and the fact that their entire mastery is based around healing more targets at low HP, it's not gonna hurt Shaman too much. They shift in the damage types, but the real change was Mythic Plus, right? In Mythic Plus, Restoration Shaman was never very popular, was never very wanted. It has been the entire expansion behind Restoration Druid, Holy Paladin, Discipline Priest, even Mistweaver Monk. But we have already started to see a shift in the popularity, which might not be because of this, but because I am biased, I'm gonna use this as compelling evidence for my cause. Restoration Shaman is already more popular than all the other healing specs only behind Resto Druid. Even in keys above 20, Restoration Shaman is still very popular. When I first started talking about Shaman in September, making the rankings for healers, yes, it was a while ago, there's been a lot of changes, but even then, one of the changes that struck me the most was their Earth Shield buff. The biggest problem of Shaman in Mythic Plus, we have mentioned, is not popular. Why? Single target healing. Every single thing, every single pore out of a Shaman's body is about AoE healing. You know, from their Healing Rain to their Chain Heal, into their High Tide buff, their Ascendance, their Cloudburst Totem, Earthen Wall Totem, Ancestral Protection Totem, Healing Tide Totem, Spirit Link Totem, everything about them is AoE tuned. Dealing with high volume of single target damage, if it is sudden and instant and not sustained, is a problem for Shaman. Was a problem for Shaman, which is why it was so much weaker in Mythic Plus. As soon as the key went up and the scaling went up and tanks were taking massive damage, Shaman just didn't have a reliable way to keep them alive. On top of that, out of the myriad of raid cooldowns they had, none of them were particularly strong for single target. They were all tuned for AoE. No pain suppression here, no life cocoon here, you're on your own. So I was very positively struck by Earth Shield, because Earth Shield went from 10% more healing on the target and 25% spell power healing when it procs to 20% single target healing and 37% healing when it procs. Even more so now you have a conduit, which is going to give you an extra 5%, scaling later on in the expansion all the way into 12%. On top of that, when we talk about single targets being the problem, they have just gotten super buffed in spell power scaling of their spells. You know, Riptide went from 66% instant spell power healing to 170. Healing Wave went from 170 to 300. Healing Surge went from 157 to 248. And Chain Heal went from 140 to 255. Yes, their base healing, their aura, changing their healing done has been reduced by a bit, but their overall healing was still buffed significantly with these changes. And I literally said, it's not that Shaman has gotten new talents, they have gotten new ways to single target heal, they have simply gotten much higher base healing on their abilities. So is this going to be enough to fix their problem of lack of single target? And that's where my gutsy call is. I think it is. I think with the new things they have gotten, with the Earth Shield, as well as all of the heals, healing for much more, even some extra single target healing with things like their Kyrian Covenant, Vesper Totem, not just being an AoE heal, but also having the conduit Elysian Dirge or extra single target healing when they use it, I think is going to make them much more powerful. Even their legendaries, both Primal Tidecore and Chains of Devastation are very good, but Primal Tidecore for raids and Mythic Plus is good because of the spot healing, because of what I mentioned with the cleave healing and healing 3 to 4 targets. It's very similar in its way to the Restoration one. The extra cast of Regrowth or Rejuvenation in Shaman's case is an extra cast of Riptide, and we have seen how much more powerful Riptide has become. Even their Covenant, when you go for Necrolord and you go for Primordial Wave, to get an insta heal for single target and an extra application of Riptide on single target, that also helps their single target problems. So my call for Shaman is that while still remaining very, very powerful for raid encounters, which was expected, the less expected call is that they're going to gain way more value in Mythic Plus than previously thought of. I think they have gotten enough changes to make them significantly stronger in single target, which was their primary problem for Mythic Plus. And with this, we conclude our healing ballsy calls of the day. Not really much to say about Discipline Priest and the other thing at the bottom. You know, one still very powerful, the other one still... No. So, tell me what you guys think. Which spec is being ignored? You know, a sleeper OP spec that is going to surprise people. If you have a different theory, please share. I'm still the only one allowed to laugh at you in the comments. If it is dumber than average, don't worry. And with this, guys, I take my leave. After this, there's going to be the range DPS and the melee DPS video for the gutsy Feelycrafty calls. So, see you guys soon. And in the meantime, I thought we had 6 healer specs.